introduce to you the person that's going to introduce our lunchtime speaker. With that, you heard a little intro for Mark Forrest earlier this morning, and one thing that Mary didn't say about him, and she wouldn't have, is because Mark is one of my bosses at HDR, and he's our national director for floodplains and modeling, and so I work with Mark a lot, and I have to answer his questions and his reviews all the time. So without any further ado, I'll be helping welcome Mark up to introduce our speaker.
Yes, it is definitely my honor to introduce to you our luncheon speaker. I've had the privilege of attending the Australian Floodplain Management Association conferences for the last 3 years, and it's been a very interesting and great experience seeing how they face almost all of the same challenges we do. While their institutional structure is different than ours, they don't have a national flood insurance program. And that direction that comes from the federal government, most of their programs are led at the state level, and Ian's going to tell you about that. But I've found it to be a great experience participating and presenting at their conferences, and how welcoming they are, and how they're using some of the tools, especially the two-dimensional tools in Australia, in more advanced ways than we are. So we have a lot to learn from one another, and it's a great opportunity for us to collaborate when we can share the experiences between our countries and how we handle floodplain management challenges. Ian has been on their board of directors for their organization, which is now called Floodplain Management Australia. They changed their name this year and changed their structure a little bit. So Ian is currently the president of Floodplain Management Australia. It's still called FMA. Prior to that, it was Floodplain Management Association, which has existed under that name since 1961. So they're older than we are. And Ian's been on that board of directors now for 12 years, with the last 4 years as their chairman. He also serves as the Director of Engineering for Moree Pines Shire Council in New South Wales. And his career start includes senior management roles as director and general manager in local government. He's also been twice elected councillor in Clarence Valley in New South Wales. So he's also been elected official. And he holds a civil engineering degree from the University of New South Wales, business management certificate, and local government engineer certificate. I know you will very much appreciate what Ian has to share, so please welcome him.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your kind introduction. And firstly, Mr. Chair Thomas, Mr. McGuinness, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be here. And I have made a heap of brand new friends already this week. It's been great, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of it. So thank you very much for having me. I come from a land down under. You can see I tried to get the arrow somewhere near where I left Australia and landed it somewhere near here. So I've travelled across the Pacific Ocean, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join with you. We've shared a lot over the years, believe it or not. In the 20 years or so that I've been involved in Australia, we have a close collaboration with your colleagues here in the United States. You might recognise some of the names there, but particularly Larry Larson, who's been to Australia 3 or 4 times, and we're still working on Chad to sort of get him down there. Quite a lot of interaction has happened already, so it's great to for us to join with you here in the United States. One special participant in our conference has been Mark Forrest, and you all know about his expertise with HECRAS and floodplain management generally and that sort of thing, but one thing that we've discovered is he knows more about beer and winemaking than the rest of us put together. So he's an essential part of our program from now on. So thank you, Mark. We also sponsor your golf day at ASFPM, or the first hole of it, and we want to claim that from here on too, so that when we're not here, we're at least there in spirit, and you'll think of us. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about how things work in Australia. Mark's given me some questions, and I'll talk a little bit about our own FMA in Australia. But firstly, many of you probably don't know a lot about Australia, so I'll give you some history. We're the same British heritage as you guys, except our problem is that we were established as a convict colony. So not a very prestigious history, but the English got rid of all their prisoners to Australia, and there we are. There was no coins or currency there, so rum was the unit of currency to start with. People say we haven't progressed much because it's now beer. So we haven't fought for our independence like you guys did, so I'm thinking strictly legally, we're probably still a convict colony. The guy at the airport let me go through the gate. So the language is easy to learn. I hope you'll all join with me as the week goes on. All you have to do is say mate at the end of every sentence, okay? So it's hi outside, mate, or that was a great lunch, mate, or thanks, mate. That's all you have to do, and you'll instantly be accepted as an Aussie. On a more serious note, the USA actually saved our bacon. Back in World War II, we were bombed in the northern part of Australia, a place called Darwin, and it was bombed just like Pearl Harbor. The only difference was that there were actually more bombs dropped on Darwin than were dropped on Pearl Harbor, so it was a pretty serious situation, and the people who put their hand up to come and save us were the Americans. One of the Army battalions built some new airstrips for us in the we call it the bush, we probably call it the forest, and that enabled General MacArthur to take charge and basically run things from there, and that saved Australia. My mother, who's no longer with us, but she was always very thankful to the American nation for helping Australia. We still share a lot with you guys today. We're about the same size, 3 million square miles, and you're 3.5 million square miles. We're the 6th largest nation in the world. You're the 4th largest, a bit bigger. Unlike you, we have 6 humongous big states and 2 territories. So you guys are divided up a lot more than us. But we have plenty of things the same. You have Miami, we have the Gold Coast in Queensland, which is an exact replica. In fact, some of the developers might have been Americans. I should check on that. You have San Francisco, we have Sydney Harbour. They're very similar to look at. The only problem is you built your bridge upside down. All of the TV shows are the same, whether it be Big Bang Theory or whatever's the current thing. You have the voice, we have the voice. It's just like a mini America. We have a range of sports people who would love to come and play here in baseball, basketball. The latest, most recent one just signed up with the San Francisco 49ers last Sunday was Jared Hayne. So those of you who live in San Francisco, I hope you follow him and give him all the encouragement that he needs. So not many of us are Aussies over here, but we're trying to blend in. So people tend to think of us as the 51st state. So we've got a lot in common. Now Mark's given me a lot of homework to do here. These are the questions that he emailed me. So we should finish. Let's see. I've got to answer them all. Let's work through them one by one. The difference in regulatory frameworks in Australia and US. Well, we have a totally different system. We don't certify levies like you guys do. In fact, none of our states can agree on how things should be done. So if we had 50 states, it would be an even bigger problem. You can see there, a number of them are local council based, and that's probably where most of the work is done. In Queensland, just coming down the, let's see if I've got a pointer here. So this state here is called Queensland, and New South Wales, that's where most of the floods happen on that eastern side. Both of those, the floodplain management function is carried out by local councils or counties, you might call them. They go down to Victoria, down the bottom there. That's run by the state government with Catchment Management Authority. The catchment, by the way, is the same as what you call a watershed. Then you've got South Australia, local council based, and same with a little island called Tasmania there. But the others are all run by the state government. Victoria, Western Australia and Northern Territory, the state government does the work. New South Wales used to be done by the state government, but they found it too hard, so they gave it to the local councils to worry about. So it's different in each state. New South Wales has probably the most advanced guidelines and flood-prone land policy. Queensland's catching up fast after the floods that we had back in 2011, or from 2008 really to 2012. There's the same three levels of government, federal and state and local. We copied you again. You've got FEMA, we've got EMA, so we just like to do things the same as you guys. The councils in New South Wales are a good example of what happens in floodplain management. They do the flood studies with government grant assistance. Land use planning, like where are we going to, once we've done the flood studies, where does the water go, where are we going to build or allow things to be built. So land use planning, councils approve the development or not approve, and impose conditions like minimum floor level heights and so on, building materials. When you go to buy a property in New South Wales, you get a certificate from the council which tells you whether or not it complies with regulations. And the councils also do the mitigation measures in those main two states of Queensland and New South Wales, like levies and so on, again with government grant assistance. Mark's next question is the difference in insurance costs and risk assessment. We don't have a national flood insurance program like you guys do. Private insurance was non-existent between 1974 and about 2007. Since 2007-8, the bigger insurers have taken it on, and most insurers are now offering private flood insurance. Some of the premiums can be extremely expensive, largely due to a lack of data in some cases. They can be anywhere up to $8,000 to $10,000, and that's based on perhaps a lack of data where they assume the worst. Gradually now, the larger insurance companies are hoovering up all of the information they can, doing their own research and modelling to actually assess risk a lot better. And they're, for example, in one town in Queensland called St George, a levy has just been completed and insurance premiums were reduced by up to 70%. So the bigger companies are jumping on board and working out their own way of risk assessment because councils don't have all of the information they need, but between the two, we're getting there. So, since 2008, we've come a long way. We've still got a long way to go to do that. Some of the smaller insurance companies are still not offering flood insurance. Mark asked us about Australian rainfall and runoff criteria. We have a publication put out back in the 1950s, in 1958. Back in the 50s, particularly in New South Wales, there were quite a number of floods, many fatalities, and flooding became a serious issue. Australian rainfall and runoff is it's been updated since then, and it's being updated again right now, but it's, I think, similar to what I saw being talked about yesterday, where you have like a guide which gives you estimated rainfall intensities for various frequency events, standard deviation recipes, and using a rational method how you calculate your runoff and so on. It's a handbook like that, particularly useful where you have a lack of flood data or lack of flood history. So that's being updated now. The new version should be out by the end of this year or next year. So that'll be on the internet if you want to have a look. How are 2D models used in Australia? Actually, Mark Forrest knows more about this than I do, but it's basically, in recent years, say the last 15 years, we've been using 2D and 1D models combined, producing flood maps, and those are then used by local councils or counties for land use planning, for development approvals, determining flood levels, avoiding high conveyance areas or flood hazard areas, and so on. As I mentioned, there's insurance premiums, they're helpful for that, in determining the risk. And emergency services, there's one town where I was working, and Chris Huxley's here today. did some modelling for us in a town called Grafton. See, we even have a Grafton. You've got a Grafton. We've got a Grafton. And the emergency services people there have used the modelling because it demonstrates what sequence of inundation occurs, and so they can plan their evacuation using that modelling and the mapping associated with it. But yeah, that's a debate with Mark, who, as you know, is an expert on flood modelling, and he can give us some more details of what he's noticed in Australia is how we use 2D modelling. The emergency response in Australia, again, differs between Queensland and New South Wales. They've used those two states as they're the most flood-prone. Queensland has a more local council-based emergency services service, and New South Wales is more of a state-based one. New South Wales has kind of gone through a bit of a transition, I guess. It was all based on volunteer work back in the 1950s, and it's grown into kind of a regimented, more of a paramilitary-like organisation. You can see the guy there with the uniform on. He's down the bottom right-hand corner. He's a former commissioner. Looks more like a military commander, and that's kind of the setup, I guess, in New South Wales. There's perhaps less ownership by the volunteers out in the towns and cities that rescue people and climb on roofs to put tarpaulins and that when they're leaking. So, but in a bigger event, it's perhaps a bit more coordinated than the other system where it's all run by individual councils. So there are advantages and disadvantages of either. And what sort of flood hazards do we have in Australia? Well, pretty much all the same as you. Mainstream flooding, localised flash flooding, tropical cyclones. We call everything a cyclone. You would call our biggest one that we've had a hurricane. Groundwater flooding in the Northern Territory, where it can rain in one part of the state and water can come out of the ground in another part of the state. That's Northern Territory, is that little bit up there. And obviously potentially from dam failure and things like that. We don't have a lot of snow melt to worry about. So unlike Illinois, say, where and I think here where rain, Mark was telling me that it rains on the snow and together that produces runoff. So we haven't got that. Where our snowy mountains are in Australia, which are in southern New South Wales, we've built a series of large dams which captures all that and then releases it to generate hydroelectricity. So that's one problem we don't have in Australia. And this is another one. Does Australia have arid regions flooding and similar issues to you guys? I misinterpreted this question before I got here this week. I said, yes, we've got arid regions and different flooding issues, but I understand, especially sitting in this morning, the alluvial fan situation and the shifting terrain and that, and how impossible that is to model. That's something we haven't. We're a much smaller population, so we don't have the development pressures anyway to try and develop those sorts of areas, let alone worry about how we could model potential flooding. So we don't have that, but how I interpret this, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about what happens in Australia. We are the driest continent in the whole world. We might be the largest continent, island continent in the world, but we're very much the driest. And people make fun of us about that. I think this came from one of you guys. Snakes, sharks, scorching desert. So, yeah, so it's not really that bad, okay? But we do have arid regions, particularly where it says nothing. One example I thought I'd show you is Darling River, which kind of analogous to the Mississippi. It starts up the top there in Queensland. Oh, hang on. Sorry. It starts up the top there. Starts up here in Queensland and runs down western New South Wales, meets up in Victoria with the Murray River and flows out in South Australia. It's a pretty dry sort of area most of the time. When it floods, it looks like that. So the only silt it's transporting is kind of fine stuff. It doesn't often look like that. It mostly looks like that. So it's a very dry area, and trickle running through the back of New South Wales. Our flash flooding situation, we have plenty of that. This was in Queensland in 2011. The bottom right-hand slide there is a place called Grantham, where quite a number of people died in their houses, and houses were washed away. So it was a very unusual major rain event, which actually combined two heavy rain areas into one over the top of this small catchment, and it was like a wall of water, people described it, and a lot of debris was transported. It was pretty much triggered a whole lot of work in Queensland that's now going on. So there were deaths, people died, a lot of people died in cars, which I understand happens here too. People try to drive through them. Cars in Australia, not always as big as yours, they float pretty easily, so people get carried away, they block culverts, which then exacerbates the flooding problem. This is an embarrassing situation. Australia, prides itself on floodplain management. Here's a fairly recent, brand new subdivision with new houses, and in 2011 in Queensland, this is just slightly west of Brisbane, and they ended up with water up to their ceilings. That shouldn't happen in a modern development. So Queensland's gone back to the drawing board. They're actually doing some modelling. I'm not sure if WBM's involved, Chris, but they've engaged 3 or 4 consulting firms to go back to square one, do the hydrology, then the hydraulics, and that's first report's due out next year. In New South Wales, where that arrow points there, that's a little coastal town which has got a steep escarpment behind it, and you can get flash flooding as a result of that. It'll arrive very quickly in the town, and it'll disappear quickly, but it's still very dangerous. It can be a metre or 2 deep in the main street. This is what we would call good planning in Australia, where our playing fields, football fields, are in the lower areas that are flood prone. That strange looking guy there is my son. That's called cricket. We do play baseball, and in fact we won the World Cup in 1999. It's one claim to fame in baseball, but mostly our nation, the national sport is cricket. Another example of good planning is, and I told you we treasure everything that America does. You invented McDonald's back in 1955, and so we've got McDonald's that we value it so highly, we flood protect it. You can see this. This one in Grafton. You can, so in the middle of a flood, you can grow up and still get a hamburger. So what's the hydroelectric data collection in Australia? Do we have an agency similar to USGS? I think we do, from what I understand of USGS. Apart from the Weather Bureau, of course, we've got an agency called Geoscience Australia. They run a National Flood Risk Advisory Group. They do earthquake monitoring, climate change stuff. So similar things, and they're the ones driving that Australian rainfall and runoff revision that I talked about. So there is an agency which you can Google and to check out what they're doing. So that's the end of Mark's questions. Just a little bit now to finish with the history of our FMA. We started with a conference, as Mark said, in 1961. The conferences in Australia are a great opportunity to drink beer. So the word spread, and consequently the numbers grew rapidly. We used to have a rotating chair depending on where the conference was going to be, but nowadays we have an elected president, which is me for the time being. And what do? Well, we make sure we have a conference every year. That's the first thing. But we also lobby government ministers, and well, perhaps you would do the same with senators, would you? So I'm trying to get a good deal for your area or your state. So we're kind of an advocacy for floodplain management. We provide a network, of course, for all of our members, just like you, to share knowledge and experiences. We facilitate workshops on floodplain management issues, and so we're very similar, really, to you guys, and a mini version of the ASFPN. One thing we do is we run an education program in Sydney, one of the universities there. That's me lecturing there. But it's something undergraduates can enrol in it as well as industry people. And where did we get the idea from? Well, it was from you. Back in 2003, I came to the first conference in the United States in St. Louis, and I saw a bit about the CFN program and took it back, and we worked on it and came up with our version of an education program. Something, I thought I'd just show you something a couple of things different that we do in Australia that you might do here, but something a little bit innovative. Wetland rehabilitation in flood-prone areas. We all know that floodgates are great for stopping inundation, but they also block fish passage from the fish trying to get up and breed. You get poor water quality behind the gate, degraded wetlands, and generally environmental impacts. Worst of all, you have we have acid sulfate soils, and I looked up, and you guys have it too in Virginia and Maryland, and here in California. Does anybody work with acid sulfate soils in California here? Have you had any experience with them? Yeah, okay. It happens in Australia where we've dug drains and you expose the soils to the atmosphere with water and it produces sulfuric acid. Sorry, I apologise for this slide. ASS stands for acid sulfate soil. Sorry. Since I got here, I've been told, So yeah, if you can translate it. So yeah, fish don't do so well in acid sulfate soil. In sulfuric acid. You've thrown me now, see. But it actually, the acid dissolves the mucus protective coating on fish and they get infected. So what do we do? Well, we introduced a system of winches and that to get the tide flowing in and out of the watercourses. And a little company invented a float mechanism with all levers and things that works on the tide, so it opens the gate, closes the gate during tidal movements, but if you get a flood and it goes even higher, it actually closes the gate and keeps it closed. So a few things like that, simple methods, like I say, winches. The one on the top right is a tidally operated one with a float, putting in different barrages and educating farmers to do the work, so we don't need an army of people, we just got volunteers who can open and close gates for us. The result here, look, that one's at least got full stops in between the abbreviation. On the left-hand side is an acid scald, where the acid runoff from open drains has killed everything and couldn't possibly grow anything. So we set about getting the tidal exchange there, inventing and modifying floodgates to allow that to happen. And what it looks like now there on the right-hand side is completely rehabilitated with some pasture grass there. You can graze cattle on it, and it's more or less back to the way it should be as the water fish can get up and breathe. That brings birds, and so it's an environmental restoration project that's won quite a few awards. Just a couple of things to finish with. Our cyclones, or what you would call hurricanes, we had the biggest one in terms of dimensions was Cyclone Yazi back in 2011. We did have one in 1974 that killed in Darwin, that killed more people, but this was one that I thought you'd be interested in, similar to Katrina. It was about 500 kilometres wide, or 300 miles. Yours was about 640 kilometres wide, I guess about 360, 380 miles wide. So similar size. We had about $1.4 billion in insurance paid out, so nowhere near